I'll preface this by saying that this is the process that we've started and that we need now to continue under the current legislation. And we have had confirmation that that's the right thing to be doing at this present point in time from DIA. So I'll pass over to Steffi now for the presentation.
Kia ora koutou. I don't need to introduce myself. There's nobody external here. Can you bring up the presentation, please? Yes, the presentation is on the hub, and we've also sent it to you via email, and what we've also done is sent you the analysis report. If you wanted a hard copy, I've got a couple here. Did you want me to hand those around?
Yeah. I'll also welcome Denise Harpiter, who's joining us online.
Your Worship, we've also got Dale of Sosky and Ben Rosser on there. I can do that. Okay. I also wanted to just introduce Dale of Sosky and Ben Rosser. They're online. They're from Election Services.
Kia ora.
Dale and Ben will be here to answer any very technical questions, if you have any. Cool. Okay, so to start off the session, I just wanted to outline what the purpose of this session is, because you may have some questions that are outside of that. First, we wanted to just quickly discuss the recent government announcement in relation to the Māori wards and what impacts that has, just so we can all get on the same page. And then the second bit would be to provide a summary of the preliminary engagement that we have just completed with the community. We've just handed out the analysis report. We'll also make that public and then discuss next steps. So there will obviously be next steps after this. We will be discussing representation arrangement options with you, but that will be as part of a different session. And the idea was not to go too deep into that today and more give you an opportunity to get into the analysis and what that actually means, what has actually come back from the community, what have they said in relation to how they would like to be represented. So first up is the government's recent announcement and what we know so far. So as I understand, you attended the session that DIA held on Friday. Staff also attended a similar session. So what we know so far is that there will be a bill that will be introduced into the House. So far we understand that that bill has not been fully drafted yet and has not entered the House yet. So there are still a couple of steps that this needs to go through. Once the bill is introduced, the way it has been announced, it will give Council basically two options once it's enacted as well. So we still need to go through all of those steps in the process. So once it's enacted, Council can either decide to continue and establish the Māori ward the way that it decided to do in November 2023. And this would mean that the Māori ward councillor would be in place for the next election. There would be a Māori ward and a poll would be required at the next election, so at the same time as the election. That would then determine whether the Māori ward would still be in place for the 2028 election. There are also a few bits that we at present don't understand in terms of what that will look like. But what we do know is that the poll outcome would then determine the future of the Māori ward and that a representation review would be required next triennium for that, because we basically would go into a process of disestablishing the Māori ward again. Then the other option, and there are a few grayer areas with that option at present that we don't understand just yet, but that would be the option for Council to rescind their decision to establish a Māori ward. And then the council would not be elected at the next election. There would not be a Māori ward. What we don't understand just yet, and there are two options in relation to the current representation review. One would be to cease the current process, and we would then be required to do a representation review in 2027 as the normal 6-yearly cycle. Or council could decide to conduct a shortened representation review to determine the representation arrangements for the next election. What we don't understand with that bit yet is whether a representation review would be required or whether the shortened representation review would count as a full representation review. There are just some things that still need to be confirmed by DIA. What I also wanted to say, there are 44 other councils around the country that are affected by this, and around the region there are obviously a couple that are also affected by this. In terms of timeframes, so the bill is currently being drafted and is expected to go through the process in May and June, with a select committee process in June, where council will also have an opportunity to submit on the process. And it's expected at present that the bill would then be enacted at the end of July, with a rescinding process being possible in August, September. The IA have confirmed that timings may change, and obviously the obvious problem with the timing is that the initial representation proposal needs to be passed by the 31st of July, which aligns with when the bill would be enacted. So there's a few things that need to be worked through to figure out how exactly that will land with each council. Cool. So in terms of scene setting for the representation review, so we will go back, as the Mayor said, we have started the process of conducting a representation review, and under legislation at present, the old version of the Local Electoral Act is still in place, and under that Act, Council decided to establish a Māori ward in November 2023, so therefore it must conduct a representation review. So this is where we're at the moment. Also in December, Council decided that the representation review process that we are undertaking should include a preliminary engagement approach that should be staff-led. So this is where we're at now, and this is why we're here today. So where are we at in the process? After Council's decision in December to approve a staff-led preliminary engagement process, we're now at step 2. We engaged with our mana whenua directly, we engaged with the community, and we developed an engagement survey that was available online and at our service centres between the 4th of March and the 2nd of April. And as I've outlined before, I've put a little bit of an exclamation mark there as well. The local government electoral legislation and Māori Ward and Constituencies Amendment Bill will be expected at the end of July. So currently we're in that preliminary engagement, at the end of the preliminary engagement process, and there are a couple of steps that we still have to step through to get to the end of the representation review. As part of the preliminary engagement process, we have also done some drop-in sessions at all of the community board, with all of the community boards. I wouldn't say that they were overwhelmingly attended, but there was a steady turnout of between 4 and 8 people that attended each of the sessions, so that was good.
Could I ask a quick question in relation to this? So the dates that you've got set here, are they set by a statutory timeline or those ones that have been developed by council staff?
Okay, so the top timelines, the ones that you can see, for example, the initial proposal decision, and then the proposal open for submissions, they've been set by staff with legislative timeframes in mind. So the Act sets a couple of timeframes. So the initial proposal decision needs to be made by the 31st of July. So staff have worked backwards. I do believe that we actually have a council meeting on the 30th of July, but if council were of a mind to let the report lie on the table or decide they wanted more information, that would put us in a tricky situation. So therefore staff have worked backwards and built in a little bit of a buffer to allow for that to happen. So it's a little bit of both. It's guided by legislation, but staff have put some timeframes in place. Then the proposal being open for submission, that's then based on legislation. Legislation sets certain minimum timeframes for submission periods. So does that answer it? It's a bit of both.
Yeah, so I suppose there's something potentially happening at the end of July, and I'm
Yes.
just wondering if you're actually doing a process before then, and then it gets undone by the legislation. Is there any option to actually slow that process down so that you actually know exactly what's going to happen as a result of the legislation?
So, Councillor Provanov, that was exactly what I was going to say and dig into. So,
Okay.
so if you've got a question, put your light on and I'll call
Yeah.
questions as they come up.
Yeah, so that's the question.
So I was going to kind of come at it from a slightly different angle and work backwards from the 11th of October date, which presumably is our hard deadline.
I can answer it.
Yeah, so presumably the 11th of October is a pretty hard deadline. We've got 8 weeks of analysing submissions before that. Do we need that full 8 weeks was my first question. Then if you work backwards, shortening that time, is it possible to open the proposal for submissions early after the end of July date, which is when we would have the opportunity to bring an urgent matter and decide, because we need to make a decision one way or the other. I think that needs to actually be actively considered. So making that decision in the middle of submissions being open would be really difficult.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering if that box that says initial proposals open for submissions, even if we carried on, accepted the initial proposal, but held off on starting consultation until after we knew what the next steps were going to be, would that be something that would be possible?
I will also ask Dale to fill in any gaps. So the short answer is a little bit of movement is possible. The end of the process, so the 11th of October date, is not the one that's set by legislation. It's the 31st of July date that is set by legislation that then kicks off timeframes that we need to adhere to. So by the 31st of July, we need to make the decision. And then there is submission periods that are very set in stone. They have a certain length that we must abide by. So between the 27th of June and the 31st of July, that's the wiggle room that we could push back before those other steps kick off. Dale, did you want to add anything there?
Yes, well, just to reconfirm what you've said, so the last legal date currently for your initial proposal is the 31st of July. The last legal date for your final proposal is the 20th of December. So they're your key ones, but in between those two dates, there's, as Steffi has said, there's certain key things that have to happen. So once you make your initial proposal, a formal resolution, Council has 14 days to place public notice. Once that is placed, there is a minimum of 4 weeks for a submission period. And once that submission period closes, there is a period of 8 weeks of which Council has to resolve its final proposal, or hear submissions, resolve its final proposal and place public notice of the final proposal. So it is quite prescribed, but there is some buffer sort of around how long do we have for submission periods. It says a minimum of 4 weeks. You can actually have longer if you wanted to adjust your time frame accordingly. But my view probably is, if you could, move your initial proposal out to your end of July meeting, which would then accommodate any announcement through the new bill.
So just to clarify, you'd be moving the initial proposal decision from the 27th of June out to the end of July.
You legally can, if that suited council with all their other activities, LTPs and that sort of thing. That would probably be recommended. In fact, I'm sure I've heard that the DIA have recommended until they get the detail released that if councils can, to defer that as late as possible before the 31 July deadline.
Okay, so if we could be provided with an updated timeline that reflects those changes, that would be fantastic. Thanks for your input, Dale. That's really useful. So I'm going to just wait until we get that updated timeline before we continue this discussion on this particular slide anymore, because we need to get through to continuing the process that we're actually on at the moment. So
Yep.
Let's carry on.
Cool.
That
Okay.
31st of
Jocelyn, I'm
July-
carrying on.
Yeah, that 31st of July, it's not actually mentioned in the slide, so I don't actually...
Yeah, that's why we're getting an updated
Okay.
slide. Thank you. We're carrying on.
Absolutely. All right, so in regards to the preliminary community engagement that we undertook, the approach that we took was we heard from you during council meetings and other meetings that we had around the Māori ward establishment and any representation review related briefings that you would like us to conduct that, but also you'd like to keep it as simple as possible within the legislative requirements. So this is what we did. And then in response to that, we engaged with our mana whenua from early January onwards. And we had discussions with them on how to best engage with their whānau, hapu, and iwi. We created an infographics and frequently asked question document, both in te reo and in English. And we created a Have Your Say survey that was live from 4th of March to 2nd of April. And as I said, we held drop-in sessions. All of that was also advertised, and it was advertised through the website, the media releases, our Everything Kapiti newsletter, newspaper ads, and social media posts. So we did something, but we didn't do too many of those sessions. So there was one drop-in session per community board. If people wanted to ask questions, they of course had the opportunity via email, but we kept it reasonably contained. The reason for that is because we heard that from you, but also council undertook a very extensive representation review in 2021, where the community engagement, we could probably say, was a lot more comprehensive and involved a lot more. So as part of the survey and the engagement, this is what we asked our community. We asked first whether they think that our representation arrangements as they currently are, whether they're fair and effective, whether there is anything that they think that doesn't work well with the current arrangements. And we also provided some concepts for the community to consider in relation to how the Māori ward should be included. So what we were trying to understand from the community was we have our current representation arrangements that we heard from councillors. If possible, could we leave it as streamlined and as easy to change as possible? But we need to include a Māori ward. How should we do that with what we currently have? And if there is anything that you think that doesn't work, please tell us so we can also consider that. And as the last question, we asked whether the community thinks that councillors should be appointed back to community boards, and if so, how? So that basically encompasses all of the representation arrangements that we currently have, but it is slightly more targeted in terms of the Māori ward inclusion. So what were the key results and findings? In total, we received 285 submissions. One of the submissions was actually received via letter. So when you calculate up all of the numbers on the following screens, you won't get 285 because it wasn't actually attributed in the survey, but it was provided to us within the relevant required timeframes, and it was very comprehensive and very easy to understand, so we included it as well. In summary, 74% agree that the existing arrangements are fair and representative, and the further 61% agree that the arrangements work well and they wouldn't actually change anything. So that is quite high. In addition to that, 51% support the current councillor to community board appointment arrangements, so also the status quo. And in relation to the question, which concept that they would like best for the inclusion of the Māori ward, 27% support concept 1 and 36% support concept 2. Both of these concepts, I can actually go back, both of these concepts are reasonably similar to what the arrangements currently are. Concept 1 would simply add the Māori ward councillor to the current arrangements, and concept 2 would replace one of the district-wide seats with the Māori ward councillor around the table. So instead of 3 district-wide seats, there would be 2 that would be elected by the entire district, and then a Māori ward councillor. So once again, those two concepts are reasonably similar to what we currently have, and there is support for that by the community. Actually, it's over 60% of the community that supports something similar. So in relation to the analysis, what we then did, that's obviously the majority of all submissions support minimal or no change. With the inclusion of the Māori ward, that will be a change that we will have to incorporate. But then the minority of people that submitted, they also gave us some insight into what could be changed if changes are needed or if councillors felt that they wanted to make changes. So in relation to that, the key findings were in relation to the ward-based representation. So some people supported a fully ward-based representation system because they felt that the local communities were better supported and represented that way. However, on the flip side, submitters also supported a change to a fully district-wide system because they felt that matters that are relating to the entire district would be better represented that way. I might throw in there, and Dale and Ben jump in if you wanted to add something. Because council decided to establish a Māori ward, a fully district-wide system is actually not possible. Ben and Dale may be able to explain that a little bit better, but if there is a Māori ward, council representation actually also have to have a general ward. Did you want to throw something in there?
Yeah, that's correct. Because you have a Māori ward, you must have a general ward. But in addition to that, you can have what we call the mixed system, which is what you currently have, where you can have some elected councillors elected from wards and some elected at large. So there is still that flexibility.
So I guess the mixed system is in that respect also probably a good approach to address those views that wanted a more district-wide representation system, because that's the only thing that council present can do with the inclusion of a Māori ward.
Sorry, just a question, Steffi. On that presumption that it went to ward only, has anyone done the numbers about what the distribution would be? So, for instance, if on the assumption that there is a Māori ward and that would have 2 district wides. If you took the 2 district wides out and put them into wards, have we figured where they would go, what those numbers would be?
So in relation to concept 2, yes, some numbers were crunched. In relation to if we went fully district wide, which we're actually not able to, no, we haven't crunched those numbers because it's not possible.
No.
And
I mean
also,
the other way
we're
around.
not that far.
I mean the other way around, about how you would redistribute the district-wide, those 2 seats, how you would distribute those into wards. So would there be another Otaki ward councillor? I also just said Otaki would have 6
So
councillors.
if you wanted a fully ward-based system, is that right, councillor? No, we haven't crunched those numbers just yet. So if you had a strong view that we should look into an option like that, then we would do that. So that will be under next steps of what we're going to do going forward. No, we haven't. No. In relation to the other findings, there were mixed views on the community board representation and the benefit of having community boards and the benefit of having councillors appointed. Some felt it was very important to have councillors appointed to community boards because it provided that link between council and community boards, whereas others felt that only directly elected representatives should actually serve on community boards. So there is a clear separation. So I guess what we're saying is, out of the minority views, there were so many different views that it is not quite clear what to pull out of it, because nothing is overwhelming and jumping out at us. However, if councillors felt that something is jumping out at you, then please let us know, because we can definitely consider that. And I've summarised that in relation to the Māori ward integration. There were also mixed views around what should happen. Some of the things that people mentioned were having 2 Māori wards, which under current legislation is not, with the current population data, is probably, we would say, not something that's possible. It would be possible, but you would have to increase the number of councillors sitting around the council table to about 18. So I don't know whether it actually is something that you would want to consider. It is possible, but then also the question around whether that's representative and effective. We would have to come up with a very clear rationale as to why that decision was made. And considering that the community actually support current arrangements, I don't know if there is enough for councillors to want to consider that.
Can I just raise one more thing? Just in terms of the community's agreement with the current representation, I don't know if there's how the data supports this supposition, but I'm imagining that the support is for the current electoral arrangement, because I'm assuming that that's what the public know about. But in terms of the actual representation as it exists, outside of that, I would suspect that most of the public don't have a clue as far as iwi representation is concerned. So the current arrangements that we have at council, I'm not sure that that's broadly known publicly, and I don't know if that was tested through this, through the survey process. But I think it was really, because this was really electorally focused.
It was a representation arrangements, or the representation review. Under legislation, we have to review the electoral representation arrangements and not the governance arrangements. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. So we're not taking
We're
this
not.
as feedback about anything other than the elected representation, right?
For the purposes of the representation review, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because these things can get misused or misconstrued or.
So the other thing too is when the information was put out, often sometimes their decision making can be driven by cost or finances. Was it explained that the end result was not potentially going to have any impact on their rates? Was that explained?
So we did have a frequently asked question document that we had online, and it was printed out and at all of the service centres and the libraries, and it did include reference to that. Also, we did have a speaking point at the drop-in sessions that addressed that. So whether each submitter was aware of it, I can't answer.
Right.
But
okay.
certainly there was accessible information on that, yes.
And that was online as well, was it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. In relation, I just wanted to highlight that there were other concerns or other comments made as part of the survey. When we did the analysis, we made sure to break those concerns or those pieces of feedback out because under the representation review process, there is no mechanism for you to consider that. So, for example, there were pieces of feedback raised on decision making by council, concerns with the electoral system, and also that some submitters didn't support the establishment of a Māori ward. But as we've already outlined as part of the process, once that decision's been made, then the representation review is triggered and there is no provision for council at present until the new legislation comes in to rescind that decision. So that has clearly been broken out in the analysis report. So it is clear that feedback was received. But what you can and can't consider under the legislative parameters is clearly defined. Yep. In terms of detailed results, so in relation to question 1 of whether people think that the existing representation arrangements are fair and effective, as I've already said, 74% of respondents supported the current representation arrangements. Specific themes, and I've already noted that they were in the minority, but there were themes as to what could be changed or what they didn't, or what submitters didn't think were fair and representative pieces of the arrangements related to specifically over and under representation of Ōtaki, Waikanae and Paraparaumu. We have summarised it as one theme because some people believed that Ōtaki, Waikanae and Paraparaumu were underrepresented, and then other people believed that Paraparaumu and Waikanae were overrepresented. So once again, it didn't come through strongly that there was a certain area that was over or underrepresented. Generally, there were comments made around more equitable representation, concerns over local representation. So they were stressing that they felt that a ward-based system would better represent local communities, and therefore we should focus on ward representation. But then, as I already said, the flip side, where they suggested a district-wide representation. So matters of significance for the entire district could be better represented. And then interestingly, roughly the same...
Can I just ask a question about
Absolutely.
the feedback themes?
Yep.
How many times does a thing need to be talked about for it to become a theme in the submissions? Like if you have one person who presents a really strong, reasoned case, does that mean it's a theme?
It hasn't been included as part of these themes, no, but it's been themed in your analysis report.
No, but what
it's
it was a
separate.
general question, not
Yeah.
pointing the one who sent a letter submission.
Yeah.
I'm asking this idea of themes,
Mm-hmm.
how many submitters have to make reference to that particular point where it becomes listed as a community feedback theme, rather than just something one person has raised?
So we didn't have a specific number because for some of the questions, we got less feedback as part of the supplementary comment
Sure.
box, the commentary. So I guess for those questions, it became a theme a bit quicker than for others. So there was no specific number. The aim was to basically outline to you that the majority support
Yeah.
the current arrangements, and then there was a minority view, and then what kind of came through those minority views. Because you may have a view of changing certain things, and then maybe these themes or these comments, maybe we can call them comments, will then support that view.
Yeah, I would probably suggest that we use the word comments rather than
Comments?
themes, because
Yep.
themes leads to me to go that this is a feeling across a majority of the submissions that we're getting that. And what I read when I read those themes is I see we've got...
Yeah.
That doesn't provide me with a theme. All it says is you've got two competing views which I would probably say is true.
I think Darren's got a comment around this as well.
Oh, just about themes. Reoccurring, that's the definition.
Yeah.
That's why I read these as under the heading of sub-themes, which takes them, that you see there's the theme, the broader theme, then there's got sub-themes, which if I was applying a status to them, means that they have a less standing. And it is a little bit semantic, but yeah,
Yes,
they
it
are
is.
separated. Well, the sub-theme, as
Yeah, I
you see
get
in the
what
middle
you mean,
column,
yeah.
that's where you will get one person saying something or two people saying something, but it doesn't necessarily, it can be countered by something that's exactly its opposite, the next one down. You know what I mean?
So there's kind of a hierarchy, isn't there? There's kind of
Yeah,
theme, sub-theme, opinion,
Yeah.
and then lunacy.
Yeah. I will take the feedback on board, thank you.
Yeah,
Stephanie, I think we've exhausted that topic.
yeah, but
Thanks for raising it, Deputy Mayor. No, it's good. It's a good point, and it is a valid one. Jocelyn?
yeah, with the types of work that's being done here, and I suppose it depends on how it's set up, is that you've got a numbers games versus the quality of, basically the arguments. And, I don't know how this was planned, but obviously this has been presented very much in terms of the numbers, as opposed to the reasons why. So often the reasoning should outweigh the numbers. I'm just saying that I haven't got any issues, but I'm just saying it's something to be very mindful of.
Yeah, I think we're being given some of that information as we go along, but it's a valid point. Steffi, want to carry on?
I would also like to add to that, for each of the questions, there was a commentary box underneath. And if the person, for example, for question 1, said that they did not think that the representation arrangements were fair and effective, they could make a comment underneath. So that would then give you then a view of what they thought wasn't working, basically. So that's how it was outlined. Yeah, those are the themes, the comments that have come through. Yeah.
Sorry, Steffi, for that question, but I'm just looking through the actual analysis report from Public Voice, and it does go through and give you the frequency of those themes, quotes, sub-themes, and how often they come up. So
It does.
I'd missed that. Apologies.
Okay.
In relation to question 2, so we asked whether there is anything that doesn't work well with the arrangements, and 61% don't think that there is anything that doesn't work well. But then the comments that came through in relation to what they thought didn't work well, interestingly, the answers were very similar to question 1. The answers were also around under and representation of specific communities. It was also challenging the effectiveness of ward councillors, and then equally challenging whether we should have a fully ward-based structure as opposed to a fully district-wide structure. So once again, the same comments kind of came through, just in slightly different wording.
At least there's 2 now, so there's only a 50% chance that that it's either one of you. Okay, Steffi, keep going. Box on.
So in relation to question 3, and that was the question around how the community thought we could best include the Māori ward into the arrangements. 19% of the respondents didn't actually respond, they just jumped it. And a lot of commentary came through, which actually council under the current representation review process can't quite consider in the way that legislation stands, but they didn't support the Māori ward inclusion, or it was something around that effect, or they jumped straight to the next question where they actually thought none of these concepts we support, we think that you should consider something else. However, as you will see, 19% said that, but there is enough support. There is over 60% support for either concepts 1 or 2 still. So I guess the question is, how much weight would you give to the 19% versus the 60%? So 60% support concept 1 or 2. In relation then, the next question was around whether there are any other concepts that councils should consider. So there were obviously more people that answered the previous question and ticked one of the concepts, but then also suggested other concepts. So not just the 19% that jumped it and then went on to suggest other concepts. In relation to the other concepts that have come through, there were 7 that have come through a little bit more strongly through the analysis. And I have listed them on the next page, but some of them, as you will see, are actually not possible within the current legislation. So some of the additional concepts that came through were around having 5 district-wide councillors and 1 Māori ward councillor with community boards. So that's the bottom one. That one's actually unlawful. I'm going to start with the unlawful ones. 10 district-wide councillors and 1 Māori ward councillor. We need a general ward councillor, so that's actually also not possible. Then the 4th one down, 1 Māori ward councillor and 1 district-wide councillor is also unlawful. Plus, we need more than 2 councillors anyway under legislation. So I guess there are a couple left that are a possibility for council to consider. The first one is district-wide councillors. Oh, sorry, that one's also unlawful. District-wide councillors only and 1 Māori ward councillor elected by the entire district. Sorry, that one's also unlawful. I didn't note that. And then second one would be 9 or 10 general ward councillors and then having a Māori ward councillor. So that would be a fully ward-based system and roughly the same number of councillors around the table. 4 ward councillors, 6 district-wide councillors and the mayor. They didn't comment on the Māori ward councillor, but potentially the 4 ward councillors would include that Māori ward councillor. And then the last one is 1 general ward that aligns with the entire district, with 9 councillors elected for that ward, and then 1 Māori ward councillor also elected by the entire district.
Question, Steffi,
Yep.
is there, do you have a view, or Dale may have a view, about there being an even number at the table? So if you were to just add in the Māori ward, then that would give 12 at the table. And generally speaking, I think almost everywhere, you have an uneven number of people at a decision-making table. So is there a rule around that?
No, there's no rule around that. It's purely a local decision. Don't forget to add the mayoral vote in as well. So if you have 10 or 12, you actually have 11 or 13 with the mayoral vote. But it's a purely local decision and what works best, so that you don't have a stalemate. You can always get something across the line with the voting.
Yeah, Dale, are you aware of any councils that that do have that? That do have? I mean, I was including the mayor as well, anyway. But including the mayor, are you aware of any councils that have an even number of people at the table?
Not off the top of my head. I can research that, but generally doesn't find favour. But I can have a look at that and come back.
I know, it's okay. Yeah, it's good.
Just a quick clarity from my end, just for everybody. I noticed there's some comments here around, less councillors, we can, for regards to saving money and that sort of thing, but just from a clarity perspective, the pot of money involved in this does not change. Is that correct? So it doesn't matter if you've got 6 councillors, 20 councillors, that sort of stuff. The allowance made for this won't be affected as such. So by going less, we're not going to be saving money per se. Is that correct?
That's correct. The governance pool doesn't change.
Yep, no, just clarifying that.
Okay, we're carrying on.
Yep. Cool. So in relation to the community board appointments, once again, 51% of the respondents, they have a preference for retaining the current structure, the way it's been set up. Obviously, it's quite hard to figure out why the community would prefer to retain the current structure or retain the status quo and just include the Māori ward, but possibly because a recent representation was done in 2021 that was very comprehensive, that may have fed into that. In relation to the reasons for selecting the different options for question 4, so they had either retaining the current structure, not appointing councillors to community boards at all, retaining the current structure and appointing the Māori ward councillor to community boards, or only appointing the Māori ward councillor to community boards. And there were some comments that came through. We asked the question to select one and then comment on why they have made that selection. Yep. Only appoint the Māori ward councillor to the community boards. We asked this question of the community to tell us what they thought would be the best option.
But just do be vigilant about using microphones because we're live streaming.
And I would also comment that only 3% preferred only appointing the Māori ward councillor to community boards. So in relation to why people thought that those options would be preferable, in relation to retaining the current structure, the comments that came back were around structure is working, it's understood and it represents the community. Appointing the Māori ward councillor to all the community boards would be an excessive workload. It's cost effective. The Māori ward should have a district focus and ward councillors should sit on their ward's community boards. In relation to not appointing any councillors, that was supported by 25% of the respondents, and the reasons that came through were separation of roles and influence. Once again, that only elected representatives should actually sit on community boards. There is no benefit of councillors sitting on community boards. It's cost effective that way, and it's an excessive workload for councillors to sit on community boards. Then, in relation to retaining the current structure plus appointing the Māori ward councillor, that was supported by 21%. The reasons that came through were that it ensures the Māori ward councillor represents the local community, so they thought that would be a benefit for the Māori ward councillor to also be appointed to community boards. It's cost effective and efficient. The Māori ward councillor should have a district-wide focus. And it's important for the relevance of the community boards. And then only 3% supported only appointing the Māori ward councillor back, and the reason for that, it ensures that the Māori ward councillor represents the local community, and it's excessive to have multiple councillors on community boards.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, Jocelyn's actually first.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure whether Steffi's able to answer it or Dale. So around the country, I suppose I'm interested in two questions. Are councillors quite often appointed back to community boards around the country? It's my first question. The second one is, how is that working for councils around the country who already have Māori wards? How does that, where those councils have community boards?
Dale, did you want to start off with that one?
Yes, where there are Māori councillors and community boards, in the final proposal, you can appoint either your Māori or general councillors, and that seems to work quite well where that occurs, and then it's the councillors themselves that can then choose which community boards they will attend, looking at workload, things like that. Bear in mind it is optional under the legislation, so councillors may be appointed back to community boards, so not all do, but the majority, from my understanding, in fact, do appoint councillors back to their community boards, and you then specify that it can be either your general or your Māori, and then the councillors choose depending on interest and workload.
Thank you for that. So, in terms of the Maori councillor, are they often appointed back to all the community boards, or how does that work?
Again, you've got to look at workload. If you've got a number of community boards and you've also got a Māori ward councillor who's doing the councillor duties, it can be quite onerous. Again, if you have that choice, then you can then work through between the councillors a bit about which should be appointed back and which shouldn't. If you have the flexibility that you can appoint either or both, probably both, then you have that flexibility of who actually attends and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can I just add to that? When I was looking into that, I contacted the local government commission, and as Dale said, there is an option to appoint a Māori ward councillor to all community boards or just some. They were very clear that the rationale as to why a Māori ward councillor is only appointed to some just needs to be explained. For example, if the Māori ward councillor was only appointed to the Paikakariki community board, there would have to be a clear reason as to why council has decided to do that, and it would have to be clear in the decision. So it's possible. There
Yeah,
just needs to be a
I think
rationale.
Jocelyn's question too was about what other councils do, not just the relative merits or otherwise. So I think we're a little bit interested in what other councils do.
So I've reached out to New Plymouth.
Yeah.
And New Plymouth, they have a Māori ward councillor that is elected by the entire district, the way that potentially the Kapiti Coast Māori ward councillor would be elected. And they have decided that the Māori ward councillor can be appointed to 2 of their community boards. I can't remember if they have 5 or 6, to 2 of their community boards, but currently is only appointed to 1. So they have an option under their representation arrangements where for 2 of their community boards it says that one of the general ward councillors and or the Māori ward councillor can be appointed back. And then at the beginning of the triennium, council appointed the Māori ward councillor to 1 because it says and or. So that's an option that exists.
So you said there needed to be clear reasons and justification around that. What was their justification for choosing the 2 and then only enacting the 1? Do you know?
I can't recall. Dale, do you recall by chance?
Sorry, I don't know the rationale for that.
I would have to look into that and feed that back to councillors.
Yeah, it just seems strange to me, this whole discussion, because the point of having ward councillors and not district-wide councillors appointed back to community boards is because the people that they represent are the same people from the same area. With Māori wards, that doesn't apply. So I don't see why we're even, on the face of it, just a thought, having the discussion about appointing back to community boards. I can't, unless there was a Māori community board, because that's the people that have elected that councillor. Do you have any comment about that? Why are we even having this discussion?
Often in a rep review, the question, particularly around the appointment of Māori ward councillors, why can't we have Māori community boards established? So that's been quite a common question, and of course the answer is you cannot legally, you can only have a Māori ward. So to get around that, you can appoint your Māori ward councillor onto your community board as a mechanism, if you like, to have more input, Māori input into your local community board. Why a council restricts that, I don't know. I can only think that it's possibly the makeup of the community and or the workload of the Māori ward councillor.
Could you have something in your governance and delegations similar to what we have at the moment for the ward councillors who aren't appointed to community boards and the mayor or deputy, that they could sit at any of the community boards and contribute to debate rather than being beholden to be representing.
Can't see why not.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
Might be,
Yeah,
that might be
without-
something to think about in the future if it comes up.
That would just not give them any voting rights.
Yeah,
But yeah,
Yeah.
Whereas the appointment does.
yes,
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
the difference. Yeah.
That's the distinction.
Yeah.
Nigel?
Yeah, just going back to the idea of the Maori ward, which is actually a district-wide role. We think of it, they're calling it a ward, but it is actually it's district-wide, and so the responsibilities of district-wide are different than ward. So the workload has to be seriously thought about here. I would imagine the Maori ward councillor would be an elected member representative on to Whakamenenga, for instance. Also, I'm wondering about this will be the toughest gig at council without any doubt whatsoever. It will be the most onerous position of any councillor, in my view. Are we looking to prepare a job description? There's an elected members thing that comes out ahead of an election that tells you basically what you're in for. But I wonder if there's something that might be more specific for Maori ward.
Okay,
potential
that's a good
candidates.
suggestion. Probably not for discussion today,
No.
but let's jot that
Yeah.
down as an
But
idea.
also that the representation around, I think one of the big issues will be around the community boards. And I mean, I have a view that councillors shouldn't be on community boards at all. It's an imbalance. It's just one person, but it's a knowledge imbalance. Anyway, but that's obviously going to be at some point of discussion. So at some point, are we going to be saying we're going to be making a representation to local government commission with our view, with a specific, we will be calling for some specific things, or I'm assuming that's what we're going to be doing, right?
So you in June, July, I will come back to you on a time frame. You will be asked to resolve an initial proposal, and part of that initial proposal will contain what you would like to put out to the community to consult on in relation to that.
Yeah.
So you will have a representation structure, including whether the Māori ward councillor should be appointed back or not. It will include all of that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Martin?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly touch on one of Dale's comments. It was just around the situation with having a community board associated to the Māori ward and that sort of stuff. Did I hear the word illegal or not allowed? Well, what was some clarity around that would actually be appreciated. Is it possible to have a community board around a Māori ward?
You cannot have a Maori community board. So the legislation does not permit a Maori community board. And that's some of the questions that have been asked, particularly from Maori. Why can't we have a Maori community board? The answer is simply the legislation does not permit that. What some councils are doing to have some Maori input into a community board is to appoint back as the appointed member to that community board their Maori councillor.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, it would be very interesting too. Lawrence?
Can I just clarify, Councillor Wilson in his comment said that Māori ward will be district-wide. That's predetermining a decision that's not been made, am I making a fair comment there?
So under legislation, the Māori ward councillor is a ward councillor. It's just that possibly the boundaries will align with the district's boundaries. So they will be elected by all of the electors on the Māori electoral roll within the entire district. But that will be up for decision, and
So
that's a
there's-
decision for you to
So
make.
that's not a conclusion Councillor Wilson was hypothesising at that point. Is that fair to say?
So I'm a little bit unclear as to Are we unsure about where the boundary is in terms of it being district-wide, or whether there will be a ward councillor?
Or a district-wide
Or district-
councillor, it'd be what their role is, either ward or district-wide.
Okay. I think
No,
that,
I'm just trying to, I just want to make clear that we're not predetermining an outcome here on a conversation that's being had at the moment.
no, we're not even debating the outcome.
Great.
No, we're just
Thank you.
hearing what the feedback said today.
Because the law says it's a ward. That's the law. All I was saying is that effectively it's a district-wide position in a ward. And in terms of, Dale might know this, but I can't imagine what the alternative would be to everybody within the Kapiti Coast who's on the Maori roll being able to vote. I mean, are you going to cut off half of Paikokariki for, I mean, what reason would you have? I don't know what the alternative would possibly be.
So the question is it a foregone conclusion that should there be a Māori ward, the voters would be, everybody on, the potential pool of voters would be everyone on the Māori roll in the district? Is that a foregone conclusion? Or would there be other options? Dale, that would be helpful, thank you.
So council has resolved to establish one or more Māori wards last year. So now we're looking at how that's going to look like. So to determine whether it's one or two, you look at a formula under the Local Electoral Act, which is based on your general electoral population and your Māori electoral population and your total number of councillors. Now, if we're looking at 10 or 11 in total councillors, there can only be one Māori ward councillor. So because there can only be one, then there is elected from one ward, but it happens to be district-wide. If you had two Māori ward councillors, you could actually split your district into two Māori wards and then have similar to your general wards. But because there is only one district-wide Māori ward. With regard to the population, we're looking at about 5,000 Māori electoral population to about 53,000 or 54,000 general electoral population, just to give an indication of ratio. And those that will vote for the Māori ward councillor will be all those on the Māori electoral roll. So that's the parliamentary Māori roll. And of course, we now know as a further complication, people can switch roles between general and Māori up to 3 months before the next election.
Thanks, Dale, that's helpful. So we just happen to be in a position where the options that we're putting forward mean that the ward would probably conform to a district-wide boundary. But it's not necessarily the case. Cam?
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair. Just a clarification also, if it is a Māori ward, does that preclude the voter from also voting on their local ward as well? So if they vote for a Māori ward, for example, they then could not vote for a Paraparaumu ward councillor.
That is correct. So if you're on the Māori roll, you'll vote for the mayor, you'll vote for your Māori ward councillor, you'll vote for your community board and your regional council. Similarly, if you're
District-wide.
District-wide.
Yeah.
Yep.
Similarly, if you're on the general roll, you'll vote for your mayor, your respective general ward, your community board, and your regional council.
And district-wide.
And district-wide,
councils.
yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, Dale, they're saying and district-wide in the room. Yeah, so just to include that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dale, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Can we move on?
Yes.
Great.
So, in summary, I think it's quite clear what the results mean. You as elected members have asked us to keep this process as streamlined as possible, and 74% plus, and well, not plus an additional 61%, that would be wrong maths, but 74% agree that the current arrangements are fair, and then 61% agree that there are no changes required. The majority of the submissions also support concepts 1 and 2, which are minimal changes to, or no significant changes to the status quo. And the majority support retaining the current councillor appointment structure to community boards. So there are alternative options that have been provided, but I've talked you through those. Quite a number of them are actually not possible within the legislative frameworks, but there are some options that council may consider or may want to consider. In relation to when we say no significant changes are required, we have also heard at previous sessions that councillors may be keen to make some minor alterations to boundaries, and that would still be possible with the current structure. Actually, this representation review would be the opportunity to do that. So we are now seeking elected members' views on what you think in relation to the representation review. So I guess we're asking you the same questions that we asked the community, whether you think that the current arrangements are fair and representative, what adjustments you would like us to make, what you think the inclusion of the Māori ward should look like, and what the appointment of the community board structure should look like. So the feedback, we can either note down the commentary that you're making in this session and include that in the working up of the options, or you could feed that back through the mayor, and then it could come through to us like that.
So far, we haven't had an explicit discussion around, on the assumption that there is a Maori ward. It seems like a big discussion point would be, are we to have the status quo plus a Maori ward, or a Maori ward and an alteration to the status quo? And that's a pretty big point of discussion, particularly if you're a district-wide councillor, you probably have a view about that. And we haven't had that discussion, so we probably want to.
Mm-hmm.
Get rid of the ward councillors.
So, I mean, we could just have a look at what the steer from the feedback seems to be, that people want as little complication as possible. They're really happy with the status quo. To me, can we go back on the options that they preferred?
Is that big enough?
So the two preferred ones were.
Concept one. So the concept one would be simply add a Māori ward councillor. So instead of having 10 councillors plus the mayor, there would be 11 councillors plus the mayor. And then concept two, that was preferred by the majority, was to still have 10 councillors around the table plus the mayor, and then simply reduce the number of district-wide seats to 2 and add the Māori ward councillor seat. And retain everything else as it is.
So we would need to go out with one preferred option, is that right? Is that what we're... Okay. So do people need a little bit more time to digest this information and have a proper look through? Or are we... Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody want to feed in more
Yeah,
at this point?
I'll go into that for option 2. You could, I'd quite happy to reduce Waikanae ward to 1, or add another one, or whatever, but the logical step would be what the Local Government Commission what they would find acceptable, regardless of what we put up. So if you look at what the philosophical direction that came back last time at the last representation review, they actually said we prefer wards. They reduced district-wide from 5 to 3, which wasn't the council's recommendation at the time, but that's what they did. They're going more towards wards, not away from them. So it sounds like the most likely thing that they would find acceptable and might enforce anyway would be a reduction of one of the district-wide councillors. the danger here is that we start to think about it in terms of the actual personalities and the people who are doing those jobs, rather than if you were designing a council that didn't currently exist. So for me, option 2's the one that makes sense, but other people will have a different
To
view.
me, option 2 is aligning the most with the sticking with the status quo in terms of numbers. And there was a concern that came through in Paraparumu too, around remuneration and adding councillors that came from the community, and that we don't want to be chipping away at that remuneration anymore because we want to be attracting quality candidates. So that's also a consideration when choosing between option 1 and option 2, and that's not coming from me, and it doesn't affect me, but it's coming actually from one of the community feedback sessions that I attended.
One did suggest
Martin?
that we just have
Yep.
6 councillors.
Happy to support option 2. No issue there from my end. One question I did have though, with regards to, there's a substantial amount of people, more so than I thought, on the Māori roll. And my curiosity is, will that impact on the percentages available for wards? Now, why I say that is because the reason why we dropped down to 3 district-wide councillors was to facilitate having a second councillor in Waikanae. That's where the numbers dropped. And but but it also unintentionally gave Paraparaumu a 3rd councillor as part of that arrangement. Now, if the numbers change, and currently we've got 5,000 people registered on the roll, and that could go up because there's 14,000 people apparently who identify as Māori on the Kapiti Coast. Is there potential for that to then change the percentages so that we might be actually down to 2 Māori, 2 councillors for, say, Paraparaumu, which then the status quo would actually just be that, dropping 1 off there and maintaining the 3. Is that a possible scenario here?
I guess how much headroom is there in the numbers?
Yeah, so with these concepts, what we did ahead of, not today, a couple of weeks ago, we contacted Statistics New Zealand and checked whether concept 1 and 2 would actually align with legislative requirements with the plus minus 10% rule. And both of these concepts already align, so there would not be a requirement to adjust anything else.
Oh, okay.
In actual fact, we also had a look at whether we could slightly alter certain boundaries that have come up over the last triennium, and that would also be possible.
Yeah.
So there would not be a requirement to add or reduce. Actually, if you were of a mind to do that, that would then have an impact on boundaries that we'd have to assess.
Okay, so if we looked
Yeah.
at, and Karima knows off despite my face, if we looked at reducing Paraparaumu to 2 councillors rather than 3, that would actually impact on all those equations
Yes,
as well. Okay,
yes.
that's cool.
So currently
it'll be
with
as it
3
is.
councillors, the plus minus 10% rule is met.
Yeah.
So if you were of a mind to reduce it, then it wouldn't be met.
Okay. that's
So
cool. No,
boundaries would have to be adjusted to
Hello?
meet it again.
That'd be
Yeah,
fine.
I
No,
think-
I was just curious about that.
Yeah. So what I kind of picked up from the last representation review is, as soon as you make a change, it has a cascade effect, and suddenly you're having to put notices in letterboxes, and people don't know which ward they're in, and which is making me lean towards concept 2 at the moment, and that's the strong feedback I think that we've had as well. So I'm coming to you soon, Shelley, but I've got Jocelyn first.
Yeah, so just following up on Martin's question and the stats, I would imagine that there's quite a high percentage of the people on the Māori roll live in Otaki. And so if they go on that, and it's from my memory, the Otaki ward is actually quite well overrepresented anyway. So is that actually going to go out? So it's not going to go outside that plus or minus 10%.
So I have included the stats at the very end, so just bear with me while I get to this line. So this is the population data that we've received from Statistics New Zealand, and this would be the data with the Māori ward inclusion for concept 1 or 2, and you can see there that the Otaki General Ward would still meet the plus minus 10% difference from the quota.
Okay, great.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
Shelley? Ah, asked and answered.
My question was to make sure we wouldn't lose our
Yeah.
Otaki rep.
Yeah, very good. Lawrence, did you want, was that your question as well? It's obviously a popular question. Okay, so I think we've got general agreement that option 2 most aligns with the feedback that we've had today. So that would be our preference to progress. Anybody got any different views from that? Jocelyn?
No, I don't. I just have another.
Yeah, you got another question?
Yes.
Fire away.
So, in relation to community boards and appointments to community boards, as you know, there are 2 ward councillors in Waikanae. One of those is appointed back, whereas you have 3 in Paparamu, and 2 of those are appointed back, where previously 2 were appointed to that community board. So as the ward councillor who is not appointed back, and I think Martin May will have some similar thoughts on this, it is actually very, very difficult to walk that road, both in terms of the community board as well as staff. And to me, it actually makes a lot more sense to have not actually having a lesser number of people sitting at that. Maybe 3 is too much at the Paraparaumu Community Board. But people ring me up and they think I'm actually the person on the ward, and I should actually deflect all those questions to Nigel, but I don't. They don't
Maybe
see
you
that.
should. So, yeah, I think that's a separate point. Do we need to decide on board representation today? Do we want to?
No, what we are trying to understand is what options would you like us to work up. So if I jump to the next slide and then maybe come back, that will help.
That'd be great.
So in terms of next steps, council staff will go away and we'll work up options. So you would have seen a snapshot of the data that we'll be working with to make certain that any options actually align with legislative requirements. So that's what we'll be doing. So you can actually give us multiple options to work up and then feed back to you. There will be another public briefing held on the 21st of May where you can then discuss those options in more detail with the data in hand. So we've attached a couple of slides at the end of the slide deck with some data that we've already requested. But if you were of a mind that you wanted a completely different representation arrangement, that can be considered. We just have to work it up now.
Yeah,
We haven't requested.
I don't think we're asking for that.
Well, I think the reason I asked that
Cool.
is because it is actually one of the bullet points in the our elected member view, so it actually is listed there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so are you seeking feedback from us about any changes that we want to make to board representation today? That was
Yeah.
the question that I asked.
Yes.
You are?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the community has said that they quite like things the way they are. Does anybody have any views that are different to that, apart from Jocelyn?
I think that's actually about councillors on the community boards. I'm not sure whether they were asked specifically about the number. Were they asked about the number, Stevie?
No, they weren't specifically asked, but they were asked whether they'd like to retain it, retain the current structure, and then underneath they could make a comment on that. Yeah.
Just one thing.
So we still have the consultation that we're about to do. So my suggestion is that we go out with the status quo, that we don't at this point suggest that the Māori ward councillor is appointed to a community board. We can always deal with that in governance and delegations in terms of, and I think that we deal with extra ward councillors that way as well, the way we have this traineum where they can sit at the table, they can get all the information. Nigel? Okay, well, I think that needs to be sorted outside of the, because I don't think we've got a majority view around the table that we should be loading all our ward councillors onto community boards, and that's certainly not the view of the Local Government Commission either, who didn't want more than one, and that was actually the advice from the Local Government Commission, not the council. I'll just remind everybody of that. Nigel?
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm of a similar view
Sorry.
that the,
Okay.
yeah, the status quo around that is what we should be running with. My personal view is that there should be no councillors on community boards and I can make a case for that. And some people would argue that there should be more, but I think if you follow local government's direction, that's where they're at. They're at about the minimal representation, just as they went from district-wide to ward because of the localism. The same thing with the community boards themselves, that they maintain as much localism as possible. Can you imagine a community board that had 3 councillors and 4 community board people? So you got 3 people who are almost full-time, thoroughly knowledgeable. It would be completely knowledge disproportionate at the community boards, and so that sometimes can happen. But in terms of the Maori ward person, after somebody is elected, it's within the gift of council itself to determine whether or not somebody could or couldn't be on community boards, right? That's not something.
That's a question.
We do that,
Yeah.
right?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
The question is, so we don't have to go out with the notion that a Maori ward councillor would or wouldn't be on a community board. That's something that after somebody's been elected, this council, it's within the gift of this council to make that decision.
No.
As we do now, is that right?
No, as part of your representation arrangement, you will have to determine whether the Māori ward councillor could be appointed back. Dale, can you jump in and add to
And the
that?
question then would be, is it a could or a would?
So the legislation says the council may appoint councillors back to a community board. So you deal with that issue first. If it's a yes, we will. Then you must specify which councillors are to be represented on which community board. So you deal with the principle first, and then the details second. That comes into your formal process of determining your initial proposal, and then finally your final proposal.
So I'm still not quite clear. So it's my understanding that once we finalise the representation arrangements, the number of ward councillors appointed to each community board needs to be finalised. It's not something that council can decide on later as part of the governance and delegations. Is that correct?
No, you specify in your proposal the number of councillors to be appointed back to a community board, and specifically which ward those councillors will come from. And you could leave it open by saying a general or Maori ward from the ward within the area of the community board. So you can be more generic, but you have to state that in your formal proposal.
Yeah. Thanks. Sorry, Sophie.
No, that's okay. I just had a super brief, comment and maybe, question, At the Raumati pop-up session, it was mentioned that because the Paikakiriki Raumati ward councillor now sits on 2 community boards, whether it could be an option for the Māori ward councillor to be considered to sit on one of those 2. I personally find it okay in terms of workload, but I think it could be off-putting for some other people running for the role, knowing that it means an extra board meeting that you have to attend and also be across. And there's also pre-meetings that are involved in both of those boards. So that's just something I want to flag, that there were a couple of people in the community who mentioned it to me offline at that meeting, just to say, checking in terms of what you feel the workload's like. Because, there are people who aren't sitting on boards who are ward councillors, but then I'm sitting on 2. So there's that to put into the mix as well. I don't have a solution or a specific view on what could or should be done, but I just wanted to flag it as something to maybe look at.
Yeah. I think what I heard from Dale just now is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dale, is that you could have a representation arrangement which you approved, which said that there would be a ward councillor on both of those boards without specifying whether it's the geographic ward councillor or the Māori ward councillor. Is that right?
Not quite. I have checked this up with the Local Government Commission, and they require a specific ward named in your resolution. So the appointed councillor can be from either the Māori ward or the relevant general ward. So you just can't have any any ward councillor appointed. The councillor appointed must be from a ward where the community board is located. Does that make sense?
So the ward is located, or at least part of it, in that area. But you would, so you would have to, just to make an example, you would have to say, the Māori ward councillor is appointed to the Paikakariki Community Board, just by way of an example, and the Paikakariki Ramati ward councillor is appointed to Ramati. You couldn't say, a ward councillor is appointed to Paikakariki, and our ward councillor is appointed to Ramati.
No, but you can specify one or both. So you can broaden your options. You can't just say a ward, but you could say from these wards, these two wards, and one is the Maori ward and one is the general ward, a councillor can be appointed back.
That works, I think, yeah, as an option. Have you heard that?
Yes,
Yeah,
I have.
I think we're quite, I think we should
Okay.
progress that and see if it floats.
Okay.
Thanks, Dale, that's great.
Okay.
Because, yeah, not everybody can cope with Sophie's workload, that's for sure.
Can I also quickly just ask whether there are any other adjustments that you would like us to consider, just so the question has been asked, especially in relation to boundaries when we work up options?
Sorry, yes, I will just quickly throw in here. Is it called Tihoro Road? Tihoro School. No, yeah, well, there's Beach Road and Tihoro, and then on the other side it's called School Road. And at the moment, if you are on the school side, you are in Waikanai, and if you are on the other side of the road, you're in Otaki, and it doesn't make any sense. So, and it's because it's very rural, you can actually include both sides of the road in there. So that's one that I would be looking at. But I would take advisement not from me, but from Tihoro people who understand the geography better, people like Liz. Yeah. But that just makes sense. I don't know if that happens in other places, but it's
So there are kind of two areas we're going to look at. One is Tihoro and the other is the Emerald Glen area.
Oh, Emerald Glen, yeah.
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 Were there any other border anomalies people wanted to? What about the individual in Waikanai who submitted last time, whose needs didn't, I don't think, get met in the end? I will take that offline. They were? Okay, good.
We're going to build a wall, make Paraparu
Nigel,
pay
have you
for it.
finished your,
Yeah, oh, sorry. Shit.
Jocelyn?
Yeah, so I think during the last representation review or after that, there was actually quite a lot of angst around moving the Waikanai ward boundary to the north. But I actually think those residents are actually a lot happier now, because I think they're probably having a lot more engagement through the Waikanai ward rather than Otaki. So it would be really interesting to hear their input to that.
So just before we answer that, we've got some people here for the briefing that was due to start at 11. We'll now be starting that at 11:15. Thanks for your patience and apologies for the delay. Okay, Steffi, was there an answer required to that comment from?
No,
So we'll wrap up this so that we can have a short break, and we can be nice and fresh for our next presentation. It's worth the wait. So less than 10 minutes you've got. 11:15 sharp. Tenewhanga Community Centre update. Not update. Great. Thank you. Thanks, Steffi. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Denise. Oh, Bernie, I didn't get to you. Do you want to quickly ask a question?